Hi, this is Savannah. We are going to talk about today on this podcast advocating in different ways for yourself and others, ways to advocate in your community, and then ways to get involved with yourself in your own community to advocate for any issues and problematic things that come up in your area.
The material and information presented here is provided by Lived Experience Youth and for general information purposes only. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are of the guests of our podcast own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Youth Move.
All right, guys. So we're going to start talking a little bit about Youth Move Colorado, where we came from, what issues are yours, and how we get to changing the world using youth voice. So just as a reminder, we've got a bunch of what I call things that flow into Youth Move Colorado. So we have our growing chapter network, right? So those are the local leaders in your community. Those are other groups. We have AmeriCorps Vista members who are capacity building, right? We have this peer leadership network. And then we have this thing called the Youth Hub. That's something that Carmen is working on. And when we got together at our retreat, and I want us to spend a few minutes going over these. These are the things that you all decided was most important for young people today. So improving behavioral health outcomes, reducing homelessness, awareness about intimate partner violence, increasing access and resources for youth in rural and frontier communities, increasing the capacity and program supports for young people, increased engagement and leadership of lived experience youth and young adults. So I'm just going to pause there and say, why are these things so important? And why do you think Youth Move Colorado is using our voice, your voices, right? Why are you guys choosing to use your voice for a whole year to get these things in the blue box to happen? Ray, hop in.
Honestly, that's a really good question, by the way, Kimmy. The reason why I would do this is because a lot of the times when it comes to resources, they are very strongly older adult based, and it's for the older adults. So when the youth need resources, it is often neglected, or they kind of get paired with their parents and being like, well, why don't you get back with your parents or get into the mind frame you need to be with your parents or anything like that. And that might not be a good situation for them, which is why we advocate for them and be like, hey, this isn't it. This is not how they feel about this conversation. And they should be able to have a voice with whatever they are saying.
Super, go ahead and hop in.
Yeah, so I second what Ray was saying. I'm serving with Youth Move Colorado. I decided to join through the AmeriCorps Vista program. And going off of what Ray was saying, it's because I want to stand up for those who are disadvantaged, who don't have a voice, who haven't gotten the opportunity to advocate and make change for themselves. And the reason why that is because we live with a system that doesn't work in the best interests of those that are currently disadvantaged. Otherwise, if we did, then there would be no disadvantaged people, if you get what I mean. We tend to have this kind of stigma that, oh, the adults should be in charge because they have the wisdom, they have the experience with the issues, when really, when I'm hoping to learn more about youth mental health awareness in particular, and I'm making a youth advisory board, or I'm creating a youth advisory board where I'll hopefully be able to listen to youth leaders more about their lives. And what I'm hoping to do is giving them voice. Hopefully I can exchange some ideas with them and devise some not only good solutions, but sustainable solutions on their behalf.
Here's my question. I'm going to put some questions in the chat box to kind of help us this. But when we got together in June, we had 3 of these up here, right? And we added some more. And I'm curious, what do you guys think will be different? Like magic wand thinking, 5 years down the road, what do you think is going to be different when young people are guiding and leading these changes?
I'm kind of hoping that everybody will kind of listen to what the youth have said or going to be saying in regards to what's going on with the world, because how do I put this? With like the older generation and things of that sort, it's kind of they are set in stone in their ways, and it's either that way or the highway, whereas the younger generations are like, well, maybe we can adjust that, or maybe we can fix this, and the more we have of that, the better the situation will be for everybody.
Yes, exactly what you were saying. Because when you have a generation that's older, whiter, more male, richer, and they have, you know, a lot of power, they are going to devise a system to their advantage. And that's exactly what we've seen for decades. And if anything, if there's any hope that I have for the future, what we've seen, especially since really the pandemic began or during the height of the George Floyd protests, if there's any hope that I have, it's that there are people that are willing to make a change. There are people that are willing to stand up. And I'm not just talking about racial injustice. I'm talking about there are unions that are speaking out against bad working conditions. There, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why I want to create a world in which these people, those that are willing to stand up for others, are in charge. They're listening to others, and they're devising sustainable solutions on behalf of the population. That's why I'm here. I want to help with that. I want to spread my ideas to those that need ideas, and also I want to hear from others that do have ideas.
I was just going to say that I would like to see awareness and like my community doing something more, even if it's like political stuff. Like I want to see like people in city council like talking about how can we change this or how can we change this problem instead of just, going around and just yelling at people like, oh, get off the street, do this and do that instead of that. Just more advocacy, more awareness of what the problem is, because then if we have more awareness, there will be more people like with the knowledge how to change it, how to fix it, maybe better the situation for other people in their community instead of complaining about the community not doing enough when they are a part of the community.
So I noticed that Kippy, you put in the chat that you had a teacher who used to say, if you keep doing what you have always done, you always keep getting what you got. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So, I think that you all have talked to this. There is this belief that if it isn't broken, why fix it? Right. And so there's always these leaders that are out there saying it's working okay, right? It's going to be too much effort to change it. It's going to be too hard to do something different, or it just feels like it's okay. So people keep being leaders, leading with the status quo. So like for me, it's like, and I'll use the one you guys added, which I thought was really important here, was you all added this thing about, making sure we have more resources in rural and frontier communities, right? We have people who live in big cities making decisions about what needs to happen in small communities. And we really need the people in small communities deciding, because if we keep saying this is how you have to do it and it doesn't match their community or who lives in that community or what those individuals want or need, we're never going to change our outcomes. Things are never going to get better. So that's kind of how I look at it. So this is a question I want to ask for you guys. We advocate using this thing, we call it the test of 3, right? And if you want real change, you have to have the people who it's most relevant there involved, right? So is the group that this issue is most important to involved, right? That's what is foundational to community change. Jurisdiction is the group that has the influence or power on the issue involved. Is this the group that has the authority on the issue involved, right? So this is kind of like this test of three that I've seen used about advocacy and community change. And so my question to you is you start looking at the change in the world, which you all talk about. What do you think we need to do to help young people be more involved? Because I don't know if when you look at these three, you say, I don't have any jurisdiction. I don't have the power to change this. I don't have the power to influence it. But I'm really curious about as young adults guiding Youth Move Colorado, when you look at this test of three, how would you explain this to another young person and why it's important for them to be involved and doing stuff in their community?
You know, kind of doing the test of theory, kind of explaining it to them. I'd kind of put it in Gen Z terms,
Mhm.
if we're going to be honest here, because trying to elaborate it in this way, it'd probably be confusing because me reading it, I'm like, that's a little funky wording, but let's see. So we have Relevance is the group that this issue is in most important to involve, meaning whoever is in said group, like for example, people that experience homelessness, those would be the main topic for whatever it is that you are doing group wise. With jurisdiction, this is the group that has influence or power on the issue involved. That would be us as AmeriCorps Vistas, to involve the fact that we have that power to help said group. And then responsible is the group that has the authority on the issue involved. So that's like your legislators, your teachers, your principals, people that are higher up than us. So I kind of see it as kind of like a triangle kind of situation. And so bottom layer is the group. Second layer is vistas or whoever is advocating for said group. And then the top is our kind of HR, HQs, things of that sort to make the situation better for everybody trickling down this triangle. What are some other things that we can do with the test of three to get the youth and I would say the responsible people to understand what the task is at hand?
Well, I'm gonna push you guys on this, right? So here's the thing: is like I really believe that you all have the power to do this. I think you are responsible, right? You always hear this term of like the youth are our future leaders. We need to invest in them, right? You hear that it's relevant because you know what it's like to be alive. Like I hear you all think about this. So what is it that you can do to help other young people know that this is a calling? This is something that they can be involved in? Because I would wonder, and I won't put anyone on the spot, but have you ever felt like, oh my gosh, I can never change the system that has been so hard on me? What have you done to step up and kind of change your mindset around that?
Good question. What I used to do, which my group was trying to get our Black students to be more recognized and have more recognition when I was in high school, because I was one of five Black kids in my entire school. And so I kept pushing my principal to make a Black student union. And of course, there was a lot of push pull, there was a lot of fight. I ended up getting it, but it was for like a brief moment. And I don't even know if it's still being continued, but the fact that I was able to get them to acknowledge Black History Month as a month for you guys to not only talk about Harriet Tubman and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., but there's other historical Black people to talk about other than those people, which they are amazing people, but you can also talk about other people. That's how I did things. And I don't know about anybody else in the group, but that's what I did.
Savannah, you willing to talk about what it felt like when you got power and your decisions started to be your own? Like, what did it feel like when that shift changed?
It felt really weird. So I remember like as a teenager, like at 14, I emancipated myself But I lived with my older brother, and he had kind of like this power authority over me. He was like a guardian and all that. And then like once I turned like almost 18, he just like was like, okay, you need to get out of my house and stuff. So I was like, oh, okay. Like when I just like finally turned 18, I was kind of lost. And then when I got out of the lost stage and like finally figured out like what to do, it was just like so surprising. And then it was so like astonishing to know that some people had the knowledge to tell me certain things and they just held it. They just held it like away from me. And it was upsetting, and it was like hurtful because some of the people like I knew very well, like family and stuff, they just never, bothered to tell me anything that would help me. And now it was just like so much more independent. I don't have to rely on anyone. Think like, where am I going to stay? Who's going to, do what to me later on, like in the night or something. It's very peace of mind, really, just to have my whole life finally together.
Well, and I led that into this because I'd love to talk about our advocacy continuum, right? This is what Youth Move National uses. This is what we use, right? So what you described, Savannah, really well is that advocating for yourself, right? Taking responsibility and advocating for what you want. We know that there are times, and so I do think, Soraya, you talked about this whole thing about this advocate for peers, right? So being able to translate back and forth why Black History Month was important, and you took on that on, and you became the voice of that advocacy, right? A peer advocate is, I think, what many of you are doing in your year of service is you're actually helping other young people learn how to find their voice and advocate for what they want. And now a lot of the work you're doing is stepping into being a supportive advocate, right? When you convene a leadership group. So Cooper, you're about to convene this leadership group and you have goals of helping support these young adults to advocate for the change around behavioral health needs within school systems, right? So I'd love if you just look at our continuum of advocacy, because a lot of people think advocacy is one thing, but it's all sorts of things. Let's talk a little bit about these different ways of advocacy and either how you help others do it or what's important for you or how you've been able to do it.
I guess I'll start with the advocating for yourself. Let's see where I can go. Mental health was my thing for advocating for myself. And that was a very difficult time for me because a lot of the times families don't really pay attention to the mental health aspect. There's kind of hush hush, and it's just like, we don't talk about it, they just crazy and just keep it moving, And for me, I didn't like that. And so I decided to get myself help, which I was just like fighting back and forth with my mom or going back and forth with trying to explain to people that I'm not okay. And I did it's volunteer supervision for 72 hours or something like that. I can't remember. But I volunteered to do that, and I was sent to Highlands Ranch. I can't remember the specific one, but after that, I kind of felt like made the situation better because now my family's starting to take better care of themselves. They're taking better care of themselves mentally. They'll take mental health days from work or from school or anything like that. I wouldn't say that I was like the Lewis and Clark of this, but it definitely helped with my family trying to fix the mental health aspect of everything. And yes, it is a 72-hour voluntary hold.
I'd like to talk about being a supportive advocate. So, as I previously mentioned on a past podcast, I grew up with a rather privileged middle class background. So, for that reason, there are people that have more lived experience than I do, which is where, on one hand, I want to advocate besides people with lived experience, but at the same time, I recognize that it's my role to take a back seat and listen to what they have to say about what they've gone through in their lives and what they believe is best for fixing the situations that not only cause them to go through such adversity, but also do the same for people that are currently experiencing such adversity. So, why do I mention that? Because I think that when you're a supportive advocate, that's what I consider myself to be. You can never truly understand what it's like to, for example, have go through an adverse childhood experience or whatnot. Now, that might be on the very extreme end, but the point that I'm trying to make is that in this kind of role, it's important for me to be able to take into account what other people have to say and even defer to them when it comes to decision making. And that's what I plan to get at with my youth advisory board. It's doing something that it allows others to make the right decisions, which is something that society is scared of, but it's a necessary change if we want to improve.
Savannah, you want
Yeah.
to tell a story about one of the advocacy roles you've taken on and what that meant and why you did it?
Yeah, I was just about to say, advocating for other people is really like good work and it makes you feel good. And it also just needs to happen. They need help. And then you can like kind of share your story with them as well to have them like feel comfortable with you. And then also if they are trying to say to something like their case manager, they're hungry, but they can't like really use their words in a good way, like in a positive way. They're just like screaming and throwing things and just like acting in a different way where you know what's wrong, but they don't know what's wrong, like the staff. And sometimes you can, be the mediator in the communication. Like, okay, they're acting like this because they're hungry. This is what's going on with them. And then you can kind of be like just a translator between the person that needs help and then the resource too that goes back and forth of like why they didn't show up for their meeting or why, they're doing this and that in a group or something like. And I've like de-escalated situations in some groups just because someone said something like offensive and they meant it as like a joke and like it just got out of proportion. And it's like, that person didn't mean that. They're going through some other things. And we have this thing called take space, make space. And I advocate in that way too. Cause like if anybody is like, sad or crying or like trying to be violent towards one another, we immediately like say, go take space, go outside, remove each other so that there's no escalation.
So I put this up as we're kind of coming to the end of our time together today, but y'all talked about advocacy, things you do, why you want it. Each of you come to this differently. That's what makes y'all such a great team. Like that's exciting to think about it is that we're not all one type of advocate. We don't look at these situations from the same lens. One of the big strategies we use in Youth Move Colorado for this work, right? I'm going to talk about two things that we use, right? So one of the big things we use is the helping relationship continuum. This is research. This is studied, So we talk about these ways of doing it. So that's one piece of it. But what's really also important is within the philosophy, we lead into these kind of topics. And I've heard you all talk about this, so I'm going to put you on the spot here. The one that's interesting, and I always talk about that we're citizen-centered, which is outside the organization. That's why our youth voice, and you all are becoming a youth-run nonprofit, right, is when you're inside a big system or a big agency, and you talked about this in the beginning, sometimes your voice, your ideas get filtered through the bureaucracy, right? So that's why we're standing on our own. But y'all have talked about these in your own way. So I want to put y'all on the spot. But the concept that everybody has gifts, that relationships build a community, and it's important to motivate others to act. I would love for each one of you to pick one of those and you could pick the same one. I'd encourage you to kind of bounce around, that you say, this is me and this is what I'm doing this year in my service. And this is advocacy, right? But we need to advocate from these different ways.
I was going to say relationships, build a community. I've been in a lot of events and a lot of social events for pro-social youth and like getting them just comfortable with strangers. Sometimes it's really hard for anyone to like show up to an event and feel comfortable with other people there, especially if it's not the same participants in the program. So like the initial set up with like an organization for an event, we have to meet the organization. We have to talk about like what we're going to do on their property, who's going to be there, how many people. And we recently just like declined more events with the church behind us because they were really just not respecting us in a way. We asked like where the tables and chairs are. We had the tables set, like we had to do everything. It wasn't like a team building experience. Like nobody from the church actually helped us like get everything organized together when they said they would. And then they just kept asking like the youth that we have that came over, what's it like being, in this situation, or what was it like being in foster care, and just really like awful personal questions. So you really have to build the right relationship with the right organization in your community, and instead of building it in the wrong type of scenario where they could just turn out into a whole big situation that you don't want to have for your youth to go through.
The one that I'm going to say, I don't know if it's already been repeated, but relationships, build a community. So building advocacy, we have a podcast and I discussed it with my site supervisor. And so we came up with the idea of having discussion with our podcast episodes and seeing how they feel about it, and then what it is that we can do to change that in the outside world, dealing with organizations and advocating for them or anybody for that matter. So that's the thing that we've been working on at my site.
I think that before we conclude this, I'd like to talk about the motivation to act. Obviously, I've spent a lot of time talking about the youth advisory board that I've been working on. But what I'm also hoping to get from this youth advisory board is that we can inspire people to act even when it's not necessarily them that are affected. We see this with straight allies of the LGBTQ community, but I feel like those people, how do I say it? To put it in the nicest way, there's a better way of going about standing up for people than just paying lip service to them, is what I have to say. And what I hope to do is to inspire people that are not affected by mental health issues to not only stand up for these people, but also be willing to act on their behalf. It's not just advocacy, it's also taking action, which I feel that there's a difference between the two. And I believe that while I'm hoping to recruit a lot of people that have lived experience, I also think that it would be healthy to invite some people that may not have that lived experience to get a better perspective of what others are experiencing and being able to spread ideas as well.
I love that you said that. It's an interesting way to end, and we're going to get ready to close unless anybody has anything else to add. But I love that idea, is that it's important that we invite others to be part of our conversations so they get exposure. And hopefully that's a lot about our advocacy that we continue to do. So I'll pause here and see if there's any last minute words anyone wants to add.
Always advocate for yourself, even when you feel like no one is listening, because somebody is listening.